The phone rang at 2:14 a.m. I knew before I picked it up it was bad news. No one calls at that hour unless it's a death, a disaster, or both. "Mr. Carson?" The voice on the other end was calm, the way they teach you in police academy classes. Professional, attentive, measured. "This is Officer Lane of the County Sheriff's Office. I regret to inform you that there was a single-car accident on Route 16. The car was destroyed in a fire. We have a name bracelet. We have reason to believe, well, we wanted you to know." My mouth went dry. 3 days ago I'd talked to Rebecca. We'd joked about tomato plants and kids, the kind of casual conversation that makes your throat tighten when you realize it was casual the last time. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. "Where is she?" I asked. "We're taking her to Riverside. Well, we can't see her at this hour." "Sorry, sir." I hung up and went wherever my feet took me, without asking permission. The morgue smelled of bleach, old laundry, and something sweet that didn't belong in such a place. When they pulled back the sheet at dawn, I saw only what the flames had left: cobalt black skin, the outline of ribs, a charred bracelet. The bracelet was mine. I gave it to her when she was 21, cheap silver with a tiny compass pendant, because she wanted to know where to go. Someone burned my daughter and decided the bracelet would be proof enough. The funeral was a blur, a closed casket, polite hands on my shoulder, my son-in-law with the eyes of a man who has learned to look away. People said the right things. The pastor spoke of peace. At the graveside, I slowly folded the American flag, because that's what you do when your child serves. I placed it in the box, the flag dry as paper under my fingers, and watched my granddaughter smear dirt across the wooden casket, just like a child would, as if she were playing in a fairy tale. 3 weeks later, the check cleared. $4.5 million were deposited into an account in Rebecca's name. Insurance information I'd never seen, policy numbers that weren't in the paperwork I kept in the top drawer where I kept taxes, instructions, and prescriptions. My husband, Aaron, moved into a house with new lighting and new shoes. His profile photos showed dinners, suits, and a smile that left my mouth tasting like gravel. He'd changed his status to widower, then to something entirely different: newly rich. I taped the glossy photograph to my kitchen counter and folded my hands over it until they went numb. The picture showed my daughter at an open-air cafe in Miami, sunglasses on her head, a flute of champagne raised towards somebody off-frame. She was clean, smiling, breathing. Someone had sent it, no note, no return address, like a cat dropping a dead mouse at your feet to remind you had one. Alive, mocking me. I did not call the police right away. There was something childish in that impulse. Go tell the sheriff the Easter Bunny exists. If Rebecca wanted to disappear, she was smart enough to have a story and a plan. She had the means, the contacts, the motive. But grief tends to fog a man's judgment. Anger clears it. I put the photograph in a folder marked "Unexpected," and I started to remember small grotesque details from the accident report that had not made sense then. A burned VIN plate, the way they had identified her by a bracelet, and a charred wallet with a half-burned membership card. No dental records, no DNA confirmation. Personal effects match is not the same as confirmed. I went back to the small things. The insurance company that wired the money had a name. I pulled old statements and cross-checked. The policy that paid out had been signed a month before she died. The beneficiary listed was Aaron. Aaron's name meant nothing by itself, but what it did mean was easy to track. Signatures, a handful of email addresses, payouts to shell accounts that emptied the next day. They had planned, and they had done it in a way that looked tidy to people who don't look. Looking is what I do. I built a business doing it. When you spend 40 years measuring risk and reading intentions, you carry that muscle into grief. So I called an old friend with a new line of work. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. Just a man who knew how to find when someone wanted to be found. He called himself Pete, And people like Pete wear the world the way men like me wear suits, worn and practical. "Is this revenge?" Pete asked the first night we met over scotch that burned like memory. "Not yet," I said. "Find her." Pete smiled like a man who never met a quiet puzzle he did not like. He returned photos a week later. Rebecca on a terrace in Miami, Rebecca at a florist, Rebecca in a salon where the color was new and offensive and not her thing. He returned a pattern too: petty charges on a card I didn't know she had, messages to VoIP numbers with names like Rex Retreat, domain registrations in places that used anonymous proxies. She was careful, but not careful enough. What I had to figure out wasn't only that she had faked her death, it was why. Love? No. Love does not get 4 million at the end of a wire. Anger? Maybe, but motive that large needs motive that deep. I started at the beginning, broken things that accumulate like dust. The house where I had lived with her mother for 30 years should have been a safe place for Rebecca. Instead, over the years, the house had been the place where the family's edges frayed and turned into knives. Old men collect lots, garden shears, model trains, the faces of mistakes. I had also collected people. A divorced son who came when he needed a hand, a daughter who married a man whose teeth shone like polished coins, friends who drifted. Rebecca had built a consulting business after the divorce, tenacious and stubborn and bright the way she had always been. She had money once, then debts, then something else. There were arguments none of us had wanted to mention. The world kept moving. People kept arranging themselves. You do not fake your death for nothing. You do it for a clean break, or for a pile of cash, or for a second beginning. The photograph had answered some of that. But I wanted the rest. I wanted to see what they had been capable of when they were sure I would never look. The second hook arrived not as evidence but as a provocation. I found it by accident when I went to the grave one rainy afternoon and noticed a woman leaning against the fence who was not a mourner. She watched the stones with the kind of attention that suggested she had memorized the place. She had an undercover look, plain coat, work shoes, and when she saw me approach, she did not try to hide. She called me by name. "You're Jerry Carson," she said. "Who's asking?" "Name's Ruth. I'm the dental tech at Mercy. I saw the papers from your funeral. Something about it didn't sit right with me. We're trained to notice." "You're saying what? That the county's wrong?" She smiled that small, bitter smile old people learn from hard hours. "I'm saying people can fake a death if they know the holes to look through. I thought someone should tell the dead man's father, if he's not dead. I thought you should know the second hook. Someone else who had seen the seams. Made everything faster." I told Ruth about the photograph, and she told me about a name that had come across a file. She'd kept copies of things for reasons she would not explain, and handed me one with a thumbprint of a name on a receipt. A receipt from a Miami tow yard. A receipt with a license plate that belonged, oddly enough, to a rental company that serviced a particular cluster of Mercedes and Audi rental fleets in downtown Miami. A thread, thin and pleasant to the touch, led to another photograph, and then to a rental agreement in a fake name, and then to a summer job Aaron had advertised on a student site for logistics support. What followed was a slow, surgical excavation of the lives they had constructed. Aaron had a history of small cons, the kind that rot marriages slowly but visibly. A promise to refinance, a phantom investment, a shell contract with a printing company that never printed. Rebecca had been hungry sometimes, the kind of hungry that sharpens the jaw and the purpose. They together had created a plan that would give them a clean new life, if executed perfectly. They had miscalculated one thing: people older than them who can still read a balance sheet, who still understand the rhythm of moving money. They had not counted the fact that a betrayed father sometimes becomes patient, and that patience is a dark and effective weapon. I could have called the police and fed them what I'd found. I could have marched into court and had bank accounts frozen and subpoenas thrown down like gauntlets. But you asked me for a different ending. I asked myself for a different one. I had watched enough lawyers and coppers handle family quarrels to know what they do best. They nationalize pain, they turn it into a file, and they move on. I wanted something that would not be written up in a dozen bureaucratic memos and then dissolved in some plea bargain. I wanted them to ruin themselves. I wanted them to pick at the wound and watch it open, to be the agents of their own undoing. So I made myself useful in the way betrayed men sometimes must. Inconspicuous, relentless, and calm where they expected a spectacle. First, I sealed the photograph into a plain envelope and slipped it under Aaron's new front door. He came to my porch 2 mornings later, sweating like a man who had outrun his conscience. "You left something on my stoop," he said without preamble. He held the photograph like a man holding a grievance. "Who are you, really?" "Someone who remembers," I said. He tried to look afraid. He tried to look bold. He did both badly. "You have no idea what you're messing with," he said. "I have some idea," I said. "I also have time." Aaron left. He went to work and to lunches and to the tailor who would stitch his new life together. He flitted through my neighborhood on the weekends wearing the comfortable confidence of people who spend money other people made. He did not yet know the pattern I was weaving. The next days were small and precise. I visited Rebecca's former bookkeeper, a woman named Linda, whose fingers moved in the ledger as if they were still holding a pen. She had been young enough to be polite and old enough to have the wrong patience for liars. "You're not the only one suspicious," she said, "but you're the first to ask." She handed me a stack of invoices, companies whose customers were primarily shell and mostly anonymous, payments to consultants in foreign jurisdictions, transfers that bounced through 3 countries before settling in a corporate account registered to a trust in the name of someone with a nice, forgettable surname. "They did it clumsily," she said. "They thought they were clever." A pattern was becoming a map. There were payments to a concierge who handled faux deaths, people who specialize in arranging missing persons who then reappear under different names. There were receipts for prosthetics, for identity documents in 3 names, for 7 nights at a motel in Georgia, paid in cash. They had the playbook for vanishing and reappearing, stages, witnesses, a burned-out vehicle, a bracelet left for sentiment and identification. It was a script that had been written for the gullible and performed for the greedy. I fed the bank a different kind of curiosity. Through anonymous tips, facts that sit loose in a system until someone picks them up, I pointed at transfers and asked for flags. I called politely and acted like a neighbor concerned about fraud. Banks, like any institution, are hungry for reasons to act. They will freeze a wire if someone whispers a strong enough lie. In my whisper I was careful. I gave them traces they could not ignore, mismatched names, an account that had suddenly ballooned, withdrawals that looked like cleanup work. The bank tied their own flags into knots. Meanwhile, I sowed tiny seeds of doubt between Rebecca and Aaron that would grow without my hands on them. I wrote 2 emails from 2 different addresses that were plausible given what I had learned. To Aaron I wrote as a mysterious investor, "We do not like shared control. If you want the next round of money, be certain who your allegiances are with." To Rebecca I wrote as a broker, "Your husband is moving money to protect himself. Make sure your name is on the right paperwork." Both were unsigned. Both were vague enough to be believable and pointed enough to open fissures. I did not advise them. I simply nudged. People who are dishonest with others are often dishonest with themselves. Give them a mirror that distorts, and they will break it on each other. The first crack appeared faster than I expected. Aaron found a transaction he did not like, a smooth transfer to a company whose name looked like it could be an umbrella, but which, in reality, was just a mailbox in the Cayman Islands. He confronted Rebecca on a Thursday night when the house smelled of garlic and something baking came from the oven. "You used my name to move money," he said. "You're keeping me from seeing the truth." "Why would I do that?" she asked. Her voice had a brittle edge. She looked at him like a person looking at someone who might be a stranger. "We did this together." "Together?" Aaron laughed, a sound that did not meet his eyes. "You told me exactly what to sign. You told me what to tell the coroner. You told me which documents to burn. Did you expect me to be some kind of fool?" "I expected you to be a partner," she said. "I expected we would—" "You expected? You expected? You put my name on everything the second I turned my back. I'm sleeping with half our money while you keep us in the dark." They argued like people with too much to protect and too little trust to protect it. Their voices climbed, then shrank, then crawled like rats. I watched from the porch with the light off and the engine cold, because sometimes the best way to win is to stand still and let the other men swing at each other with clubs they sharpened themselves. That night, Aaron left the house without his wallet. He knocked on a neighbor's door in a rage and asked to use their computer to check balances. He learned, through the easy interface of online banking and the cruel neutrality of tables and numbers, where a sliver of the truth had gone. He saw transfers that did not match his own memory. He saw numbers that suggested Rebecca had more access than he did. He came back swinging. The second seed I planted worked like a slow-release fertilizer. I called a woman who had once been Rebecca's friend in the early days, when they all still had cheap coffee and cheaper promises. She was a brittle thing with good opinions who had been hurt by Rebecca's sudden climbs and conspicuous absences. We had a talk. I asked her to mention something to Rebecca about Aaron's possible infidelities, offhand, in a neutral tone, as if it were gossip. People perform for their audiences. If a woman is told her husband may be two-timing her with the neighbor, she does not hear the word maybe. She hears look. And once you tell someone to look, some will search even without cause. Within a week they were a mess. Accusations were flung like broken glass. Aaron found a receipt for a hotel in Orlando with a name that was not his. Rebecca found a dinner reservation under a different account, credit charged to a card she did not recognize. Trust was eroded at the joints that had once held them together. Angry conversations turned into a handful of nights apart, then a confrontation where Aaron accused Rebecca in front of friends. She stormed out, and in her haste, she left her phone behind. Phones are small betrayers. In the pocket of a jacket she abandoned at a cafe, I found a message chain that made my hands go cold. Rebecca arranging a meeting with a former client who could produce a birth certificate under a false name. Rebecca exchanging numbers with a man who had access to fake dental records. Rebecca making references to the burn in a tone that was practical and almost apologetic. Reading that was like being in the lab where they dissected the plan. It also gave me exactly what I needed to create the next step. A staged betrayal that would make them rip each other open. I did not set out to turn them into monsters. They were already moving toward that work all by themselves. My task was simple: remove the last convenient lies they could hide behind. I created a situation that demanded immediate action and then stayed out of it. People who are guilty under pressure panic. People who panic forget alliances are the only weapon they have. I booked a conference room in a neutral building downtown. I picked a Thursday at noon because people with new money take lunch like a declaration. I called Aaron and told him I had evidence that Rebecca had been in touch with the funeral director discussing the certificate and asked him to bring any proof he had. I called Rebecca and told her the same thing, phrased differently: calm, careful, respectful. "Come alone," I asked both, and both did. Pride is a poor chaperone for suspicion. The room had a high table, no windows, and a clock that ticked the way all clocks do when men are about to break. I sat on one end. Aaron came first, breathless with righteous anger. Rebecca entered 5 minutes later, composed, then brittle. "You both brought witnesses," I said, because I knew they would. Aaron had a friend who could nod convincingly. Rebecca had a lawyer who smiled through small, pained smiles. They sat like gladiators who had stuck to rules because then you could blame a referee later. I placed one photograph on the table, a glossy print of Rebecca laughing at the Miami cafe. I placed another, a screenshot of an email exchange about prosthetics and identification, the kind of message you'd expect only from people who work in that peculiar industry. Then I said the only thing I needed to say. "You both planned this," I said. "You both had reasons. You both agreed it would be clean. It wasn't. They have records." Aaron's face collapsed into a man whose hand had just been burned and been told the burn was his own fault. "You planted that," he said. "You—" "Do not start," Rebecca said. Her voice was small, but it had an edge. "You started this, Aaron. You wanted it the way you wanted anything that wasn't yours to work, smooth and quick." He stood up as if to strike. His lawyer grabbed his sleeve. The friend tried to walk away. Rebecca's eyes were the only thing that did not move. They fixed on mine with a kind of cold surprise that felt like a blade pressed against the back of the throat. "You lied," she said. "You lied about how much you loved me. You lied about how you'd handle this. You made deals in secret. You think I didn't?" He jabbed a finger at her like an accusation that could physically tear a seam. "You forged documents and left me to be the face of it because you thought I was stupid. I work the side deals while you take the easy life. I signed for you. I did the pickups. You did nothing that I didn't tell you to," she said. "You've always been a coward, Aaron." They shredded each other with words like men tearing at a net. The lawyer hissed pleadingly. The friend looked for the exit. The lawyer tried to pull Aaron aside and calm him. I sat back, watching them. The plan was working because it came from their own bones. I had not fed them poison. I had given them a mirror and a tight room. What followed over the next month was theater without direction. They blamed each other in emails and in angry, drunken voicemails that bounced into the hands of people who had always liked scandal more than they liked either of the two involved. Friends took sides. The bank called to say the account had been frozen pending an investigation into fraudulent claims. The charity that had accepted Rebecca's last request for a donation returned the money and asked questions the donors did not want to be asked. The social circles that had once welcomed Aaron's new shoes and Rebecca's sudden taste for certain wines closed their doors slowly. The personal costs were surgical. They bickered in public places where people they once thought allies now sat with newspapers open and wrists checking time. They took to social media to make statements, and their statements were cruel because they were defensive. Rebecca posted a short message about privacy and grief and had her account inundated with comments and private messages that were not kind. Aaron did what men do when they are cornered. He looked for someone to blame and found a convenient scapegoat in Rebecca's former life, an ex-client who had been generous with praise when they were rising together. He accused that man of arranging the identity work. The man sued for defamation. It was a mess that smelled like rot. I watched them unmake themselves. I watched them schedule meetings that ended in shouting, watched lawyers eat their savings in retainer notes, watched them reach toward one another for comfort and find only hands that smelled of suspicion. I watched Rebecca show up breathless at a friend's door and confess, "I thought it would be different," and watched the friend's face harden in disgust. I watched Aaron throw a wine glass against a wall in a hotel room and then call his mother to say menacing things that would later be used in depositions for restraining orders. Their skill at deception became the mechanism of their undoing because it required constant invention. Lies need upkeep. They were exhausted by their own maintenance. I never told a prosecutor what I knew. I never waived files and demanded charges. Instead, I did something simpler and in some ways meaner. I showed each of them what the other had said in private, carefully, without commentary. People who think secrets are currency rarely think about what happens when those secrets are minted and passed around. I sent Aaron a recording of Rebecca arranging a dentist's appointment for some records, sure that the sound of her voice would be the final insult. I sent Rebecca a strange invoice that dropped into her inbox with a note. "You forgot to sign the affidavit. Don't be careless." Both reacted the way guilty people do, with panic and recrimination. In the end, their empire of convenience collapsed into a single unanimous verdict. They could not trust each other. It is an unlovely way for marriages to die, but marriages do die in the quiet stages more often than in the dramatic ones. They traded recriminations and accusations until one of them, Aaron, decided that the quickest way to save himself was to reveal everything to the bank and the insurers, to be a cooperator, to point fingers at the scripts he had once read the lines for. He signed statements in exchange for a lesser penalty. He gave names, dates, emails, and payment logs. He watched as Rebecca turned on him with the same ferocity he had used on her. He provided receipts that showed transfers she had ordered. She produced correspondence that suggested he had altered documents. Both were experts at improvisation. Both were poor at the art of confession. The justice that came for them was not the one I had planned. It was more mundane and therefore more complete. An insurance company that has been defrauded is a hungry, bureaucratic thing. It will take its pound of flesh, even if the pound is measured in reputations. Regulators sniffed the pattern and sent audits and subpoenas like dogs to a scent. Banks closed accounts. Journalists smelled a story because they always do. People who had loaned Robert small fortunes in the past asked for their money back with legal letters that smelled like the clack of typewriters. The things that build a life, credit, trust, a name in the paper, unravel more quickly than you think if the right authorities begin to pull on the ends. The climax was an afternoon in July when they came to my house to beg. They were not graceful in their begging. Aaron came first, unshaven, eyes hollows that had been polished by sleeplessness. Rebecca followed with a plastic politeness that was brittle. They spoke at once. "You don't have to do this, Dad," she said. Her voice was high, a little shrill. "We can fix this with you. You know how to handle these things. Let us do it our way." "No," I said. Aaron dropped into a chair like a man exhausted by the scale of consequence. "Jerry, please." "We can go to the bank together. We'll return the money. We'll sign whatever." "You mean you'll try to let the lawyers paint a deal and keep most of the money?" I said. "You mean you'll leave with the same arrogance you had when you took what wasn't yours?" He blinked like someone who had just realized that his strategy had been seen through. "You don't understand what we had to do." "I do," I said. "That is precisely the problem." "I never meant to hurt you," Rebecca said. "We can right this." "Right it how?" "By rearranging the corpses of our choices?" I asked. My voice did not raise. There are moments in life when anger does not need to be loud because it is already heavy. You wanted a life that started fresh. You got that. You just didn't expect the weight of what disappears when you make a life on borrowed things. "I didn't want the boys hurt," she said. "You hurt them," I said. "You put them through an absence no child forgets. You used my name, my history, and my trust to build an exit ramp out of our lives. That is unforgivable." They cried then, both of them, different tears. Aaron's were animal, Rebecca's were clinical, surgical. I had snarled them with words I had saved up for years. They fell into each other like men drowning and pulled each other under. The revenge I had chosen was not a public currency. I did not want their prison sentences or their bank accounts seized as trophies. I wanted something quieter, for them to be the instruments of their own ruin, to become so spent by defense and accusation that no energy remained to pretend otherwise. They did that to each other. After they left, I sat on the back steps with a cup of coffee gone cold, and the photograph of Rebecca's laughing face folded in the pocket of the shirt I had worn that morning. I could have taken 1,000 different paths from there. Lawyers could have fed themselves on the bodies of the guilty. The courts could have sorted crime and motive like shoals in a river. But I had wanted a different sort of victory. I wanted to walk away with my feet clean of their mud and my hands empty of their need. So I walked. A few weeks later I sold the house. Not to them, not to keep any grace or retribution close. I sold it to strangers who wanted light and low mortgages and who did not know the stories that had waited in the corners for years. I did not take all the money. I took enough to sit comfortably and a little left over for a trip, one with no itinerary and no one to please. The rest went into accounts with names that were sensible and boring: retirement, preservation, small trusts for grandchildren who would never know the smell of old envelopes. I kept the bracelet. It stays in a small box on my bedside table. I sometimes touch it at night, the way a man touches a compass when he cannot see north. It is not a monument. It is not even a memory exactly. It is a talisman for the way choices can point you, if you let them. They reported on the collapse in pieces. The long articles made for satisfying reading for strangers: fraud, betrayal, a husband who pretended to be a widower. And then the papers moved on. People who work in small towns favor new scandals for a day and old gossip for a week. Aaron and Rebecca are ghosts to most who knew them. To their close few, they are cautionary tales and an object lesson in the predatory power of ambition when it sits in the lap of convenience. As for me, once the storm had passed, I took my grandson to the coast. He is small still, the size of a hand, and he collects rocks and names them. We sat on a bench and ate fish and chips, and I taught him, in small ways, how to look for the tide. Not to punish him, not to shape him into a wise old man, but to teach him that things come in and go out, but some things you should not let go of. Dignity, honesty, your word. He asked me if I was sad. Yes, I said. Sometimes. Will they come back? He asked, meaning the grown-ups who had made the choices. No, I said. Not the way you mean. Some things you fix. Some things you learn from. Some things you leave. He chewed thoughtfully on a chip he had dipped in vinegar and made a face I recognized from when he was very small and learning that not everything tastes like candy. He laughed, and the sound cut through me like light through fog. When the plane lifted me home, I did not pack the photograph or the documents or the notes I had kept. I folded them away into a drawer where they will sit until the end. I kept the box with the bracelet, and I kept the little pile of receipts that showed where money had flowed. They are not trophies either. They are not evidence of victory. They are reminders that you can be hurt and quiet and, in the quiet, make choices that let you keep something of yourself intact. People will say I got lucky. They will say I had resources and time and a stubborn streak. They are not wrong, but they will never know, unless they sit in the dark and wait for an animal's response to betrayal, what patience tastes like. Revenge is often spoken of as if it is a sudden flame. Mine was slow and patient, a thing you construct from small pieces the way you would rebuild a porch after a storm. It did not make me whole. It made them responsible to themselves for a change I doubted any court could have forced. And the final thing I did, the last quiet act that felt like a closure you don't see in newspapers. I went to the nursery and planted a row of tomato seedlings. The soil was still warm from the sun, and the air smelled like salt and fresh earth. I watered them and put a small marker with their names on it. The brand of patience they could not buy back, perhaps the only thing I had left to teach. If anyone asks if I got justice, I will answer in the only way that matters to me now. Justice arrived in the sound of two people tearing one another to pieces until there was nothing left of the life they had built. I did not watch them in the hospital or in a cell. I watched them in the slow unthreading of their choices. That was enough. At night sometimes, when the house is quiet and the TV has gone soft with late programming, I take the bracelet out and lay it on my palm. It is a small thing. It points like a compass. It is not a map, but it tells me this: you can be used by your own children, and you can survive. You can be betrayed, and you can still wake up the next morning with a plan and hands that are steady. That is what I left them with, the task of facing the truth they had chosen to make. I left with my dignity. I left with the knowledge that the world makes room for those who do not ask for it, but take it gently. The boys come to see me now on Sundays. They bring rocks and jokes and the questions that belong to the young. We plant things that will not move. We grow tomatoes and we wait. And in that waiting, I find a kind of peace that is quieter than revenge and far more stubborn.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.